When Steve Humphrey and his wife, novelist Sue Grafton, found their Louisville estate, Lincliffe, the gardens had long been neglected. But they saw the potential that was hidden behind the weeds, and over a decade lovingly restored the property to its original grandeur, adding new treasures along the way.
When we bought this property, which was probably 1999, it took us 6 months to work out the details. The gardens had been neglected for 17 or 18 years.
So the first thing I wanted to do when I finally ended up moving into the place and started working on it was try to find what the gardens must have looked like. The site plan and some of the big trees and the hardscape was designed by John Olmsted, Frederick Law Olmsted's nephew, and a member of the Olmsted group. And then in the late 30s, the Crawford family hired a very highly regarded and well-known landscape architect named Bryant Fleming. And he, I think, built the fountain, and he put in the Boxwood garden. What I've tried to do is carve into the stuff that had been overgrown and allowed to go to disarray, and to see what it would have looked like and bring it back to at least that original design.
Originally in the front, we had these overgrown bushes. I don't even remember what they were called, but it was just clumpy and obnoxious, and clearing that out was a big help.
If there is a theme, it would be man's dominion over nature. I like to show that I can plant and grow things to suit me rather than to suit somebody else or something else.
It's nice to have a garden that looks like it was there all along. You don't want your effort to show too much. If you do it cleverly, it looks like it's always been that way. The best part of the garden from my perspective is watching it develop. At first, it's just a mess, you know, it's hardscape and digging and clearing. And so the little plants go in and they're so tiny, you know, and they look so pitiful. And next thing you know, they're growing, they're developing, they're relating to one another, and they have to get down and trim it all up so it'll look civilized.
Most formal gardens traditionally have statuary. I've got the statue of David in the style of Bernini. It's made out of Italian limestone. It dates back to about 1880. It was allegedly in the garden of Sir John Gielgud and was sold when his estate was disposed of. Things like that require a large space so you can see it from a good distance. And it was in 3 pieces, and we could only get as close as the driveway. A guy with a crane had to come in, so we had to take this crane and send it out 70 feet and then set it down in place and then put the next one on top of that. We were very nervous about that because we could just see David toppling and breaking. And I created that arbor, and it's got plants growing over it. So you can't really see until you get to the end of the arbor, and then your eye is drawn to the right, and there's the fountain. Over the years, a lot of tree stuff had fallen into it, leaves and needles and stuff. It was 12 inches deep of dirt. And I got out there with my shovel and wheelbarrow and cleaned it out, one course of the fountain at a time.
The fountain, which probably had not worked for 20 years, they dismantled it, labeled all the stones, laid them out on the grass. We replumbed, we did new electrical, and then they put it all back together again.
And then there's a pond with water plants and stuff in that fountain. And then I've got some other plants and hedges and azaleas and things around there. And then I've got a fernery in front of that.
It's lovely to have it up and running, you know. I'm a big believer if you've got a fountain, it ought to be pushing water out.
Whereas the fountain garden is shady, the Boxwood garden is very sunny. And it's got statuary in there. It's got very formal hedges.
The Boxwood garden was all grown together. You could scarcely walk single file. And everything was dead. Everything was neglected.
In the Boxwood garden, there's the statue of Pan and a little nymph. And that was here when I got here. But having seen that, I thought, aha, statuary. So then I got the 4 statues in the Boxwood garden representing spring, summer, winter, and fall. And under each one, I've planted things that will flower in the appropriate colors. So I've got oranges and yellows under autumn, and reds and bright yellows under summer, and pastels under spring, and then all white flowers under winter. They're fairly old. They're very heavy. And it was funny, when we put them in there, we had to dig a big hole and fill it with concrete and rebar so that we could have a base for those statues to stand on and not tip over. And then we started planting and designing the knot gardens around the statuary.
Steve developed all of the knot gardens on his computer. So we planted them so they look like they grow in and out. I can see the history in it, and I can see how it's been redeemed and brought back to life, and that's always lovely. When people come out that path and turn and look at the Boxwood garden, they're always astonished.
I started thinking, okay, I've gotten it back to what it might have looked like and what the original bones were. Now it's time to start adding things. And I started designing elements. So I'm always looking for things to work into my design.
When we travel now, we always go to gardens and look and see what others have done. Steve always takes a camera. He always comes away with some new scheme afoot. It keeps it moving so that it doesn't get static. And I think every time you come up here, there's something new to appreciate.
I've never had any formal training, but a lot of information's available online. The only design principle that I've ever really learned is to try to create rooms in the garden so that each section of the garden is complete unto itself. And also I try to make it a surprise. So when you travel from one garden to another, all of a sudden you turn a corner and you go, wow, look at that. And it's a simple idea, but you'd have to have some space in order to do it. And so this has been a real joy to have the kind of space and the kind of room and the kind of structure that was here. All the hardscape was here. All I had to do is fill in the gaps.
My husband, Steve, is very passionate about this property, and his love is the whole process. I'm a perfect audience for a good garden as it grows and changes, and that I feel is my role.
As you turn right out of the Boxwood garden, along the wall is what I call my English border garden. And I've seen this in many places where you have a staggered planting of flowers that flower at various times during the year. And it's very densely planted, and it's often butterfly attractants and stuff. And then you go through that, and then it's a completely different garden. It's just all zoysia grass. And in the middle of the zoysia grass, I've done an in-ground sculpture, a design, where we've carved out channels and lined them with aluminum. And then we put different colored rocks in there. We had to get my laser level out. We had to make sure that everything was exactly square, because if it was slightly off, you'd see it. So everything had to be exactly centered and exactly square. What I like here is the simplicity. There's a nice open space of this zoysia grass. I wanted something that I could keep fairly low and keep those channels and those designs visible. And the zoysia has done really well. It goes dormant in the fall and winter, but boy, in the summertime, it cranks. And then below that, there's a hedge of blue point juniper. And so you can't really see over it, but then you go down the steps and around it, and what used to be the tennis court, I've turned into my fragrance garden. Everything in there is fragrant, either to touch or by bloom.
I love the popcorn plant that Steve put in. You run your fingers along the leaves and it smells like buttered popcorn. I mean, how can that be out in nature? It's amazing.
And it's a garden unto itself. And when you're in it, you can't really see any of the other gardens. You explore things, you try things, you hear about things, you see things, you think, I wonder, could I grow that here? Is there any reason why I couldn't? Let me try. I experiment with things and try things. And if something doesn't work, I'll try moving it. And if that doesn't work, then I'll pitch it, try something else. But, I give it at least 2 chances.
It's just fun to see new things go in and watch them struggle and watch them prevail.
And I built a maze. Every boy needs a maze. But I designed it on my computer. And we planted 525 blue point junipers. And I had lined everything up with paint lines on the ground, again with my lasers and stuff, so everything's perfectly square. And as I went down, I had dots where I wanted to plant these things, and I would drop my auger bit down in there, dig a hole. Someone would come after me, take a plant out of the pot, put it in there. Someone would come after him and put the dirt in. We planted this in about a day and a half. And then after they grew up, I realized that I'd made a mistake with the design, and I had to alter the design. Some of it involved moving or taking plants out, but some of it required adding something. I had a section of the garden where it was natural to go one way, and you would skip a third of the maze. No one would ever go to that part of the maze. So I had an old door that came off one of the cottages here, and I painted it bright colors, interesting colors, and then I just stuck it in the ground attached to some posts, and it's got a window in it. People get to the door and they realize they want to go through it, but it won't open. So they're sitting there rattling at the door trying to get through it, and they can't get through it. And then when you come on the other side, we see where the door is, and it's actually there so that people can't take a shortcut through the maze. I also put a lot of little tchotchkes in there, skeletons and Bigfoot and little statuary in my garden. So you come around a corner, there's a chicken, or a rusty horse, And so I put a lot of stuff like that in there. That's kind of fun. I'm trying to make this garden as low maintenance as possible. I can't claim to be an organic gardener, so I rely on chemicals quite a bit. We found a lot of pre-emergent weed control that we put down in areas just to try to keep the weeds down, because if we had to hand weed this place, we would never get it done. There are all kinds of plants that they claim are deer resistant that aren't. The deer eat a lot of things that I'm thinking, why are you eating that? All it does is motivate us to have secure areas that the deer can't get in. The previous owners, they had a dozen people working on the grounds. We have 3, myself and 2 people. But we have hydraulic machinery, we have gas engines, and we have chemicals. Between those things, we're able to kind of keep things under control. The fragrance garden is the last garden I've created, and I think we're done creating gardens because I think we've reached the limit of what we can maintain.
It was a slow process along with the interior of the house. We took 10 years to put this together.
I'm concerned about my legacy. I've never had a canvas like this upon which to express myself with my lust for gardening and for plants. The idea that somebody would come along, subdivide the house, and bulldoze all my gardens just drives me insane. My challenge is to figure out how I can keep this place intact. There are a couple ways to do that, and I'm going to explore some of those to see if there's a way that I can take this work of art that I've tried to create